Welcome back, it's me, Lou, and for today's video, I think it's important to always be able to go back and review your past artwork. And I think it's even more important to be critical of your work and try to figure out areas of improvement or what you could have done differently. So with so this new series of drawings I've been doing for YouTube, it's been almost 2 weeks since I did my first drawing, and it was that Venom drawing. So what we're going to do today is that I'm going to pull out all the drawings I did over the last 2 weeks, and we're just going to take a look at each one a little bit critically and try to figure out, where I might have gone wrong, some places where maybe were my strengths or what I could have done differently. It's like I said, I think it's very important to be able to be critical of your own work. It's the only way you'll ever grow as an artist. So we'll do that. So first off, we'll start off with the Venom drawing. Okay, so as you remember, this was the Venom I drew. I did this back in February 27th, 2001. That was almost 2 weeks ago. And for me at the time, this was kind of me dipping my toes into trying to see if I could do a YouTube drawing video. So I was a little bit more, I guess I could be a little bit more forgiving analyzing this drawing because it was my first time out, and it was also me just being a little bit looser with a marker. So let's examine the finished product first. All right, so in terms of the character, this really does convey the character of Venom. Venom is a very large, bulky character. He's very top heavy. He has huge shoulders, a huge back, huge arms. He has a crazy mouth with lots of fangs and sharp teeth. He has the big eyes. So let's examine this drawing critically. All right, so first off, am I happy with the gesture? Yes. Are there areas of improvement? Oh, definitely. Looking back at this, there's certain things about the Venom character I kind of wanted to portray, but either I forgot about it or I don't know. But so one thing Venom's known for is that he has this giant long tongue. And I think one way I could have improved upon this drawing, if I was to redo it again, is maybe I could open his mouth up even more and then actually have his tongue coming out of it. Maybe I could have added, I like where the light source was, but maybe I could have been a little bit more detailed since I was lighting from underneath, and maybe I could have went in here and added a little bit more, a couple more wrinkles in his brow and his forehead, to really give him more of a, fierce, intense expression. Like this already looks pretty intense, but I think when you could add a little bit more lines to his forehead and other parts of his face, you could really tell where the muscles are and give him a little bit more intensity and veracity to the character. The fingers here, they could definitely use some improvement. It almost looks like I just drew one finger and just cloned it 3 other times, because they look almost, despite the length, they actually look very identical to one another. Maybe I could have changed up the gesture of the hand, so instead of this being very plain like this, maybe I could have made the fingers like claw out more, and maybe give each finger a slightly different motion or pose than the one next to it. Because I mean, this does the job. It shows that he has a hand, but it's not as expressive as it could be. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take out a blank sheet of paper, and I'm quickly going to sketch out how I'd improve this drawing. Alright, so if I was to redraw the Venom drawing, now this is going to be a very loose gesture drawing. I'm not going to thoroughly render it out just for the sake of time, because I'm going to go through all the other drawings I did this week or the past 2 weeks. So for this Venom, I like the idea of him being hunched over and having the camera pulled up really close on his head and his shoulder. So I'll preserve that. So we'll say that here's his shoulder like before. And then here's his arm. There's his bicep. We'll have the muscle going out. Blah, blah, blah. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was thinking about adding a tongue to him. So let me finish fleshing out this character, then I'll show you what I mean. Okay. Maybe I could have made his head here. And all right, so right now I'm just trying to place in all the large shapes. All right, so his eyes would have been here. And I mentioned a tongue. So what I probably would have done if I had a second chance, I'd probably add his tongue coming out. That might be a little bit too high. Let's bring it down a little. I might go over this with marker real quick just to solidify and make the drawing a little bit more tangible than what I have here. No, that doesn't look right. I think one reason why I might have not placed the tongue initially is because I think he has such large teeth. You have to really place the tongue in the correct area, or it's not going to make sense because there's going to be a lot of overlapping. And then it's like, where do the teeth go? Okay, this is not necessarily perfect, but it gets the point across just a little bit better. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I probably should have done something a little bit different with the fingers. And we'll flesh it out. I'm trying to do that right now, but I think it'll help me better if I start solidifying the drawing a little bit more. So, all right, let's just do this really fast. I want to make sure I give each drawing enough attention and enough time for each one. So it's important, like in a stage like this too, when you're just drawing loose, how is the gesture coming along? Because the gesture is really going to sell your drawing. You know, you don't want your characters looking too stiff, too static. It's nice to make them look animated, gives them a little bit more personality. Alright, so right now let's kind of compare what I have here so far with the original. So here's the original, and then here's what we have so far. For if I had to redo it. As you can see, here his tongue's pulled back inside his mouth. And over here, the head's slightly tilted up with the tongue coming out. Now, in terms of making the hand a little bit more animated, you know, perhaps I could have tried to figure out how to draw the fingers a little bit more dynamic. But the tricky part is, you know, how much of the fingers are you going to see, because there's very limited space here. So if you could kind of make sense of this, maybe here's his thumb, and then here's his middle finger, and then here's his pointer finger back here, and then somewhere inside here, this is going to be where his palm would be. So, you know, does this work? Is this a stronger composition than this one? I think if I could pull off if I redrew this and if I could pull off the hand correctly, I'd say yes. Otherwise, I love how I would have the mouth open and I'd have the tongue out. Like, there's really nothing wrong with this, but it could be improved upon. All right, let's jump to the next drawing. All right, so the second drawing I did in this new series of YouTube videos was I kind of drew a bust of Darth Vader. Now, when I first drew this video, I told myself, I even discussed this in the video later, is that I wanted this to be a much cleaner drawing than the Venom. Whereas the Venom drawing, it was fast because I needed it to be fast. I wanted to see if I could actually do a sketch on YouTube, and you know, it was a drawing that I didn't want to give much thought to. I wanted it to be much more visceral and organic experience. Whereas this drawing here, this was more planned out. It was a little bit more methodical. The choice of the angle of the head was very conservative. It was easier to do this because it wasn't the pose wasn't necessarily dynamic or very expressive. I mean, just in terms of the character's nature, Darth Vader isn't necessarily a very expressive character because, for one, he's wearing a mask. Two, he's always very stoic. He's always just standing there. He's not like a dynamic superhero like Spider-Man or Superman where he's leaping at you or he's flying at you. Unlike the Venom I drew earlier, you know, Venom has a very expressive face. You could see his eyes. His eyes change shape. They could squint. They could get larger. There's not a whole lot of expression to convey with Darth Vader when you just look at him because, you know, it's a mask. His character poses are always very static and he's very stiff. Now, I'm happy with the way I rendered this drawing. So like I said, this was very deliberate. The lines are a lot cleaner. It's a lot more thought out. There's a really well-defined sense of lighting. The rendering style is very consistent across. But the question is, how could I make this better if I was to redraw this? And one thing I'm thinking of is maybe we play around with the camera. Maybe we play around with foreshortening. Maybe we exaggerate certain features. Maybe we kind of almost make him look a little distorted. Since he's kind of so static to begin with, maybe we could play around with the proportions, exaggerate certain things. So we'll take a look at that. So let's take a look at, so before we go, real quick snapshot. This was Vader before, and let's take a look at how I'd tackle him now. Okay, I think one thing I might do differently if I was to draw Vader again is instead of having the drawing being oriented landscape, meaning it's horizontal, I'd probably go for a vertical composition. So I'd probably go portrait, like this. And instead of Vader's very imposing, so I was always kind of taught, like, if you want to make a character look imposing, I always plant the camera so it's maybe slightly below this character. So it's almost like as if you're looking up to the character. So maybe we could, for this Vader, if I was to redraw him, maybe the camera's coming, maybe the camera's placed slightly below his eye level and we're looking up at him. So he seems like he's towering over us. So maybe one way I could do that is, let's let's get his basic head shapes in first. Okay, so this time around, maybe, we really want to sell that Vader's taller than us, that he's towering over us. So, we have this composition oriented so it's vertical, and we place the camera so it looks like we're looking up at him. So maybe give him to exaggerate his features a little, like here's his eyes. Now this isn't going to be perfect. This is more so just about gesture, so if some of it looks a little bit off, that's not important. We're just trying to examine what we could do differently to make this a better composition. Like the geometry of his head is really complicated. I don't want to like overthink it right now and try to get it perfect. Right now, I just want to sell the composition. If you can sell the composition, I'll worry about details if we actually drew it and made a refined drawing. Right, so I'm just trying to place the basic shapes of his costume, just trying to figure things out. All right, I hope this is making sense. So what I'm gonna do now, just to flesh it out a little bit better, I'm just gonna quickly go over it in marker, just to give you an idea of what I'm kind of seeing in my head. Yeah, so Vader has a really tricky shape when it comes to his helmet. So right now, this for me to sketch it out real fast and make it look right is kind of difficult and kind of a challenge right now. Now, one thing changing the orientation of his of this drawing is that we get to add a little bit more detail than what we had previously. Now, Darth Vader has this chest box on his on his chest. There's all sorts of buttons and lights on it and stuff, and knobs and switches. And I think it's it's like life support. I think it's part of his life support system. I'm probably wrong on that, and someone's gonna correct me, but. And then he has this pimp chain that comes around. All right, we'll say this is the chain. And then he kind of has like this cape, and then he has like that body armor kind of deal. and shoulder pads. All right, so is this? Let's see. Now, for you, the viewer, is this making sense? Now, let's see. Okay, so here's this Vader. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's a very conservative pose, a very conservative angle. And then when we look at this, I'm not sure if I conveyed it well enough, but the camera's slightly below his eye level, so we're kind of looking up at him. Now, one thing I think that the advantage of doing it like this also is that, I didn't render this in yet, but when we do it like this is that we could light him from underneath, and if we light him from underneath, it really sells the fact that he's a nefarious and villainous character. Like I mentioned before, what I was taught, and this does hold true, is that if you want something to look evil or weird or scary or terrifying, always light it from the bottom. I think it's more so prevalent in the old horror films from back in the day. So if you light them from the bottom, you know. If you light him from the bottom, he looks more menacing. You know, there's nothing friendly about him anymore. And not that it was to begin with, but everything that makes Darth Vader seem bad, it's like amplified. So by lighting him from the bottom, we could really create the fact that he's a villain. Pulling the camera towards the bottom helps us establish the fact that this guy's he's larger than life. He towers over us. So yeah, this Darth Vader, you know, as we can see, he's being lit from down at the bottom of the page. So that's where our light source is. He's standing above us. You know, there's nothing friendly about him. And if we want to make this even more hardcore, and maybe around here, maybe we could have fit in a hand, like maybe he's making a fist. You know, like he's maybe using his force powers, or it's like I said before, what I learned, I think it's Francisco de Goya, I believe it is a Spanish artist. Everything about his characters, they were so intense, and that's told through the characters' eyes and the expressions in their hands. It's like in real life, some people speak, you know, with their eyes, some people speak with their hands. And if you could fit a hand in here with maybe like he's angry and he's like making, I don't know, maybe a fist, you know, to convey that he's powerful, or maybe he has a clenched palm, like he wants something in his grasp. You know, we could sell that here. So let's compare it real quick. This is the very conservative Darth Vader. I think when I drew this one, I chose to light him from the upper left corner. That's why the highlights are up here. This is more of a bust. It's a very static pose. And this is like terrifying, scary Vader. Alright. Let's move along to our next drawing. And here we have Wolverine. First off, do I like this drawing? Yes. This drawing works for me. The character pose, the facial expression, and the gesture, for me, it hits the mark. It really conveys what Wolverine's all about. There's a little bit of arrogance in his face, He's kind of snarling a little. He has his trademark wild hair. He has the claws. Wolverine's also a very muscular character. It's conveyed here. He has a very ripped forearm, giant bicep. His chest is puffed out. He's ready to tussle. So, how would I improve this drawing? I don't think it's necessarily... Now, the way I would improve upon it isn't necessarily about changing his gesture, changing his face. For me, not that they're perfect, but I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the fact that I framed the character perfectly for me. I cut from the upper torso, from the chest up. I fit in all the key things I wanted to fit into it. I have his wild hair. I have an expression that I'm satisfied with. I like the fact that he's making a really tight fist and his claws are out. All his muscles are clenched and tense. This guy's ready to go. Now, when I look at this, I think for me, I'm more concerned about the way I rendered him out. Like I'm very happy with how I rendered out his glove. I tried to convey this as maybe like a dark leathery material, yet at the same time it's tight enough like a spandex where it'll outline all your muscles, and the material is also reflective a little, so it kind of catches the light and kind of like rim lights it a little. Yet at the same time, it maintains that quality that this is a darker material. That's why there's more black. So for me, I love the arm. I love how it's rendered out. I love how the metal bits here kind of have a nice reflective metallic quality to it. Now the areas I would improve is first of all would probably be his arm here. Now this was a fast drawing. If I had more time, like if I had 3 hours, I'd probably go back and for his arm here, which would be flesh, I'd probably add all the veins and make the muscles even tighter, because I'd have the luxury of having more time for that. For me, even though his arm looks ripped as it is, I'm not happy with it completely. I'd want it to be a little bit more vascular, a little bit really cut, like you could tell this guy is like super intense. Rendering flesh by itself is kind of difficult for me too, because I like rendering stuff that has texture quality to it. Like as I mentioned earlier, this glove's kind of like a leathery texture, so I love creating a ratio of maybe 80 to 20, 80% black, 20% white, and trying to figure out the values through cross-hatching and stippling and shading. Whereas flesh, it's harder for me to figure out how to render, because the minute I add too much black to it or too much shadow, it changes the material. It no longer becomes flesh. Maybe it starts looking a little bit too leathery, or I even run the risk of flattening out, which I don't want to do, because you want to make sure with muscles that you shade it and render it so that you still have the peaks and valleys, and you still have that conformity that kind of helps give the muscle groups volume and mass. So for me, it's just something I have to work on in the long term, is trying to learn how to render bare flesh by itself. And on top of that too, Wolverine, he's a very hairy character. Not so much nowadays. I think people are more conscious about it since the early 2000s, but in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, everyone always made sure to give Wolverine very hairy arms, because he was just naturally a hairy character. So it was very common for everyone to draw every single tiny hair on his arm. And if I had the time, I'd probably do that, just to kind of convey that. And I might even go into his face and add some like stubble, maybe give him like a 5 o'clock shadow. So that's what I would improve upon with this Wolverine drawing. I don't think I need to necessarily go back and, like with the Vader or the Venom, and redraw it out, because I am happy with the gesture. I'm happy with the expression. The lighting works for me. He's a good guy. I'm not necessarily going to light him from underneath unless I want him to look like ferocious and intimidating and make him look scary as if you were a villain looking at him. But for me, this borderline's more on anti-hero than hero, and I think it works. His face is rendered out, so he's a little bit grittier. His hair is kind of wild. I like the rendering I used for the hair with a dry Sharpie to kind of give it a more feathered and brushed out look. So yeah, Wolverine, this guy's and not that I'm rating the drawing, but in terms of am I happy with it, I'd probably say maybe like an 8 out of 10. So this guy for me, very minimal changes. The gesture, the facial expression, the lighting, everything works for me. If anything, it's more about just refining the drawing and perfecting my rendering technique in the areas that really needed it, like, maybe this arm, and doing something different with his body costume here, just because I want to give this a different material texture than what his arm would be. And right now they're kind of looking the same. But overall, I'm happy with this. So not too much I'd change here outside of this, the way I'd render things. Alright, so now we're coming up onto Skeletor. Alright, so Skeletor, now this is kind of a mixed bag because I look at it and I'm happy with it. I like the expression in his face. His proportions are nice. In terms of contrast, I'm really happy with that because the material of his outfit, he has these leather, like, I don't know, bands flowing out from his shoulders, and he has a bone necklace in this chest piece. And I think I did an okay job of rendering this out as a dark material to create contrast against his face, which is a lighter color, and his body also. So I'm happy with that. Now, would I change the pose or the gesture of the character? Now, this is where it gets tricky because I would say no. Because in my head, it was more so about just capturing Skeletor head on. This wasn't as much of a character study or anything like that. It was just me wanting to draw the character head on. If anything, maybe what I could change is not be so lazy and actually draw his arms in, and maybe you can see his hands. Just like the Vader, maybe he has a clenched fist, or maybe he has his hand grasping out at you. Something just to sell his expression just a little bit more. But for the most part, I'm kind of happy with it. But this is a villain, and I think if I had to pull a page out of the Vader that we did just a little bit ago, I'd probably light Skeletor from the bottom also. Because he is a villain, his face is a friggin' skull, for God's sake. So it's like, I really got to push the fact that to make him scarier. So, I mean, now that I'm looking at this now, that could change. I could change the lighting for this drawing and light him from the bottom up. And then just really emphasize with harder, more rigid shadows on his face that the light's coming from the bottom. Make him look more menacing, more terrifying, and maybe play around the proportions also. Maybe I can make the lower parts of his jaws bigger and the top of his head a little bit smaller. Maybe make his neck a little bit longer. So yeah, there's ways I guess looking back at it, I could improve upon it. But in terms of, I like the fact that I'm looking at him head on. So right now, improving him is more so about just maybe playing around with the proportions and just changing the lighting a little. Also, I wasn't happy entirely with the way I rendered out. There's this kind of bat symbol that's on his chest and around his neck. For here, I just went for a simple crosshatch. And I don't think it blends in as well into the rest of his armor as it should. I think it kind of fights with the rendering on his chest here. And I think if I was a little bit more mindful, I probably would have came up with a better way of rendering out this bat here. I'm not looking at it, it bothers me. It almost looks like a fishnet on his chest or something. So yeah, I'm not really sold on the way I've rendered out the material surrounding this part of his neck and armor. Same looking back also, maybe same here with the bones here. I think in my head I wanted to give this more of a metal kind of sheen, which kind of works around here where the gemstone is. But I don't think this really sells Skeletor as being as a really rough and gritty character. Maybe instead of going for a metallic sheen, maybe I should have just kind of rendered it out and stippled it so this actually looks like bone, not necessarily, bone covered in metal, if that makes sense. So yeah, a couple changes, maybe light them differently, change the proportions, and definitely re-examine how I rendered out the materials. But otherwise, I think this is an okay drawing. If I had to rate how content I am with it, maybe a 6 or 7 out of 10. Which isn't bad, but at the same time, like I said, for this drawing, is more so about me just seeing if I could draw Skeletor head on. But if I really wanted to convey his character more and just make this look like a kick-ass crazy drawing and make them look really menacing, yeah, there's definitely a lot more work I could do here. But this is a very generic, graphic influence kind of image. But it works. But yeah, this could use improvement. But I'm content with it overall. All right, the next drawing is the crow. All right, now right off the bat, for me, in terms of I'm not rating it as a drawing, but for me, am I content with it? 10 out of 10, definitely. For me, 10 out of 10. I look at this. There's nothing I'd change about it. I'm sold on the expression. I love the look in his eyes and his mouth. For me, I just look at this and he's looking back at me. This drawing, the character has life to it. His pose, his gesture, everything about it feels organic to me. Everything about it just flows, even in his hair. I mean, his hair just literally flows. And then his arms, they're skinny, they're lanky, they're not rigid. If you look at it, there's actually a slight inward curve. It's not a straight arm. His shoulder and his arm here curves also. And that wasn't intentional. I think that was just when I was drawing it, everything just came out so organic and smooth about this drawing. I didn't over-render it anywhere. I think if I had any difficulty, it might have been with the eyebrows, the makeup, because I was kind of caught in a tight situation. Because here, if I blacken in his eyebrows, it fights with the makeup that's solid black, and all of a sudden it's like, where do the eyebrows begin and where does the makeup end? So I kind of had to figure out how am I going to render out the eyebrows. So instead, I just went for a couple of simple lines and just kind of gave it a gray value. Just, the gray value, it provides contrast against the bare white skin, and then also, the very solid black makeup around the eyes. And also, I think that this scared me a little. I wouldn't change it. I think it's fine. But rendering out the lips was kind of a scary experience, because it's like you make them too dark, it kind of makes the drawing look comedic, because all of a sudden the lips look like makeup, and they look like makeup here, but it's not as dark as the black here. And I think if it went as dark as the black, his face would borderline a little bit more on comical than serious. So yeah, this drawing is cool, but let's say I had to draw him again. All right, this is perfect. We're not going to mess with this. But let's say, hey, draw the crow again. What would I do differently? All right, so I think one thing I'd do differently if I had to draw the crow again in a different kind of composition is that, okay, maybe instead of having such a tight up-close shot of him, maybe we pull the camera really far back, and instead we just make it a full scene. Maybe this is Detroit, and we're looking at the skyline, and maybe he's sitting atop one of the buildings. So let's just kind of figure it out. Maybe we have a building here. Here's a ledge. And we're looking at maybe a profile of the building, and maybe there's a fire escape here. There's maybe windows. And then maybe we kind of see other buildings across the street. Maybe there's a water tower here. On the rooftop of one of the other buildings. And then maybe in the far distance, maybe we get more so just a silhouette of the rest of the city skyline. All right, this is starting to look like Chicago with Willis Towers, but we'll just pretend, okay, for the sake of this drawing, we'll just say this is another city like Detroit, and I'm not sure what Detroit's skyline necessarily looks like, but and then maybe we have, maybe we just have him Maybe the crow's on top of this one of the buildings, and this is now this is more telling of his character. Maybe he's this perched up atop this one of these buildings, and maybe we just see a silhouette of him. And maybe he has his trench coat that he's wearing, and he's kind of leaning over, just looking over the city. You know, this is a very almost like a Batman kind of thing too, with the rooftop. And maybe we have clouds going across, and maybe like a moon in the back. And maybe there's some structures here. So like I said, this is like a foreground element. We have the water tower. We have some buildings in the foreground. Maybe it's like a fire escape building, and then we have these darker buildings that create the skyline in the back. Here, maybe it's like the convenience store across the street or some apartment. In the far back, we have these city skyline. So given a chance, if I had to draw the crow a little bit differently, maybe I'd do a very pulled back composition and just make it more about a scene that's telling a story versus this. Like I said before, this drawing here, this is perfect for me. I'm so sold on the expression. I love just staring at this because everything came out just perfect. I didn't overdo it, and for me, just the conscious of black and white, it just works. But if I had to draw the crow again, it's like I said, we just create an entirely different composition altogether. We maybe try to convey more of a story. And you don't always have to pull up so tight on the character to express what they feel. Maybe he's just leaning over, maybe sitting down on top of the roof, and he's just meditating, or he's just lost in his own thoughts. And with the moon back here, we have to play around with the lighting and the city in the background. Maybe there's lights, and maybe we could draw a street towards the bottom with cars and people, and he's just kind of an observer. So yeah, there's so much room for opportunity in creating a new composition. If I was to draw the crow again, I might in the future. We'll see. All right, up next we have Bebop from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, overall, this is almost like the crow too. I'm very happy with this illustration. The way I rendered it, for me, it's not perfect, but it's different than the Vader, it's different than the Venom, it's different than the Wolverine. As I mentioned in the video, this drawing is a better representative of my natural style when I draw. Especially when I used to draw comic books, my art style looked very much like this. A lot more finer lines, a lot of cross-hatching, shading, rendering, trying to create textures, like, making reflective lenses on the glasses. Playing around with the lighting, like trying to light up here. I like theater lighting, making everything look stage lit. So this is nice. I kind of regret that I didn't draw in. Now this is just me being lazy because I was trying to make this drawing within an hour. But I kind of wish I put in more time and actually drew his other arm here. And maybe I could have added another fist that was just like this, but it's coming at you. I could have probably finished off this part of his torso a little bit more. And one thing that does bother me is that the shells on his shoulders, this body armor that's made of turtle shells, it kind of looks, I don't want to say it looks half-assed, but it doesn't have as much care and attention to it as like his vest does, and the rest of his face. These look like an afterthought. So if I had to come back and redraw this, I'd probably devote more time and make these shells on his shoulder look a little bit more detailed. Well, but overall, I'm very happy with this drawing. If I had to rate my contentness with it, it'd probably be about 7 or 8 out of 10. It could definitely use some improvement, but in terms of just being happy with it, it's definitely just like a 7 or 8 out of 10. You know, I was very happy that this drawing looked the way it did after spending an hour on it, just because it's like I said, this drawing represents my art style a little bit better. Alright, coming up next is my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Rocksteady drawing. Now this is a drawing that as I was doing it, I want to say I was disappointed in the way I rendered it. I'm so used to drawing with a lot finer lines, and in this one, every line just seemed very heavy. You know, these lines here, when I'm trying to create the value in his snout, they just seem heavy. This line here, I like drawing big fat contour lines, and that works. But at the time when I was drawing it, I wasn't happy with it. But the funny thing is, after I uploaded it to YouTube, and I was watching it, and I was watching it on my phone. So when I was watching it on my phone, the image is, you know, it's only like 1/10 of the size of the original piece. But for some reason, when you take an image and you kind of shrink it down and view it in a tighter space, it kind of pulls the details in together. And when I saw that, now this is drawn on, what is it? I think this might be this is a 9-inch by 12-inch sheet of paper. But when I viewed this image on my phone, let me see if I can pull it up so I can show you what I'm talking about. Let's go to YouTube app. Yeah, so the tricky thing was, I wasn't happy with this drawing as I was creating it. But after I uploaded it to YouTube and I saw the thumbnail of it, I'm like, wow, that actually looks really tight. So here's the thumbnail of it. And let me click on it real quick. Welcome back. Let me turn the volume down. Okay, so if you look at it, where is it? Okay. Let's get that. Okay. There's the light's kind of reflecting off of it. So when I was watching the video back, and I'm looking at the drawing, you know, it's kind of hard to see here with the light reflecting off of it, but the image just looked so much tighter. And let me pause it for a second if I could. Rewind. There we go. Pause. Yeah, so seeing the image smaller and a lot tighter, I'm like, wow, it looks perfect, you know. But when I'm looking at it full size, I have such an issue with it. I'm like looking at these lines, I'm like, I don't like the line quality. It's not working for me. You know, I'm looking at the helmet, I'm like, this looks so cartoony and it doesn't look as well thought out as my other drawings. But the minute I view it and it's shrunk down, it takes on a completely different feel to it. I'm like, wow, look at that. The lines tighten up, the shadows tighten up, and you know, the expressions really sold on me, and I'm like, wow, this actually really, really worked. So in some ways I was kind of more upset at myself that I had so many doubts about the drawing while it was in progress versus the final result, and actually seeing it through a different lens, you know, seeing it on YouTube and actually seeing it on a computer screen or on my phone, because the image I don't know, it came across a little bit different. It looked tighter, and all of a sudden the character looked like it actually looks like he's looking at me. So yeah, this was a pleasant surprise. It's not that I hated it, but I wasn't really happy with it when I was working on it. It wasn't until after I was done and I, you know, got to look at it with fresh eyes again, but through a smaller screen, that I was like, wow, this is pretty neat. So, all right, let's take a look at, let's see what else we have up here. What's our next drawing? All right, so the next drawing was Trap Jaw. All right, so for Trap Jaw, All right. Now, when I look at it, am I happy with it? Yes. Was I happy with it at the time of the video and when I finished it? Yes. But looking back at the video now, now this is something you're gonna have to do. So when you get a chance, actually go back and look at the Trap Jaw video, but start towards the beginning, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So everything about this drawing, it's okay, right? I know I'm not gonna put it over and say it's great or anything like that. I think it's rendered really clean, and I'm happy with that. I love the way that the shadows are conveyed here and my line work here. It looks nice. It works. Yeah, I love the contrast of this arm against this shoulder here. The material is conveyed differently. Like this looks a little bit shinier. It looks harder. You can tell this is maybe a metal. Now the face looks alright, but when I was watching the video back, I'm like, the face looks completely different when it was just in pencil. The minute I took a marker to it and I started darkening the eyes and the mouth, it changed the character completely. So if you go back at the Trap Jaw video, look at it and just watch the first half of the video when I'm still just drawing in the pencil sketch, and just look at his face, it's almost like a completely different character when it's just in pencil. For some reason, the minute I blacked out the eyes and I blacked out the mouth, it just changed the character altogether. And for me, looking at the video, the pencil sketch of Trap Jaw's face looks like what I'd envisioned in my head of what the character is supposed to be. Now, the finished product here looks okay, but then when I go back and look at the pencil drawing of the face, I'm like, damn it, that's the face I wanted. And then for some reason, as soon as I blacken in these eyes and then blacken in the mouth and creates this shiny material around his jaw, it just changed the character altogether, and it kind of lost something there. So this one, I'm happy with the way it was rendered and the way it came out, but it's okay. But man, that pencil version of the character, especially his head, it conveyed a completely different personality than the one right here. And the pencil sketch of the face is what I really wanted, not this guy. Not to say that there's anything wrong with this, but if I had to go back in time and re-ink this, I'd probably try to make the finished ink sample look more like the original pencil sketch of the face. Because I think that face, the pencil face, is a lot stronger than the finished inked one. But overall, it's okay. I'm happy with this drawing. I think this was one of the longer videos, and I think I was just more mindful about getting clean lines in, which I did. But yeah, going back, if I could change this face, I definitely would. Okay, so up next is Spider-Man. Alright, I like Spider-Man. I'm very happy with the way I rendered out his muscles in the darker material. That looks nice. One thing I'm not too crazy about, it kind of works, but at the same time it seems kind of sloppy and a little bit messy, is that I even mentioned this in the video. I can't stop drawing. So at the end of the video, I'm adding all these extra lines, trying to create different value. And I should have stopped, because the minute I started trying to create a sense of shadow and shade here in the shoulders and the chest, not that it ruined the drawing, it made it look a little bit more detailed, I guess, but it didn't look as clean as the drawing started out. Because there was a moment in my head when I'm looking at the drawing, I'm like, man, this is such a clean drawing. And if I could pull off a clean drawing and make it look nice, I'm really happy. And there was a certain point, once I got a little bit too loose with the marker, that this almost got like a sketchy quality to it, and I really wanted this to be a bit cleaner and a little bit more, I don't know, professional looking. So if I could go back in time, I probably wouldn't have added these little, little stipple bits, and this definitely I wouldn't have added these lines here to give it some shade. If I did, I'd probably be a little bit more conscious and methodical about it. Unlike if you watch the video, I'm just being random, like, I can't stop drawing, I'm gonna add all these lines. And so I would have pulled back on that. And one thing I would change too is that I'm happy with the character's pose, but I think I made him definitely too top heavy. This is almost kind of like what Venom looks like, where Venom's all about giant shoulders and a giant back, and I think I got too caught up in the gesture that I forgot that I haven't seen in the beginning of the video that I picture Spider-Man as being a skinnier, lankier character, like a athlete, like a basketball player or like a runner. And then I definitely lost that here. You know, at some point when I was sketching this out, all of a sudden, you know, Spider-Man was juicing up and was on roids, and he just bulked up. So yeah, if I had to do this all over again, I'd keep the pose the same, but I'd probably reduce his muscle mass by probably like 25 or 30%. I'd lose this giant back and shoulder deal, and I'd probably tighten his shoulders in, pull him in a little bit tighter. You know, definitely make his back smaller. And, you know, but for the most part, I am happy with the drawing. I was happy that this was one of the fewer drawings where I got to pull the camera back and do a medium shot. Oh, one thing I would change differently too is that when I'm erasing, I wouldn't have gone so friggin' ballistic on it, because, you know, I end up tearing the page right here. So, you know, if I do this all over again, you know, mental note, be gentle when you erase, because we don't want to get too loose and F this up. And lastly, we're coming across my Sharkticon drawing. So when I drew this Transformers Sharkticon character, I knew that I wanted to draw something that wasn't a superhero. I knew that I wanted to draw something that wasn't an up-close portrait. And I grabbed a toy that I thought looked visually interesting, and it happened to be that Transformers Sharkticon, and I drew it. And I'm happy with it. It's different. It's not a human being. It's more on the monster slash robot mechanical side. The line work works. Someone told me that they love the reflection in the eye. I like the fact that for like this hand here, it's a little bit more at you, so I used the boulder line. It's kind of separated from the rest of the drawing. So I'm essentially kind of creating layers on top of layers. It almost looks like you're compositing stuff and you're just dropping stuff on top of each other. So the line works for me. The rendering works out for me. If I could do anything different, it probably wouldn't. Maybe, I don't know, make him a little bit more dynamic looking, because this is kind of a very static pose. It's almost like the Vader. He's just kind of conservative. It's like you could tell I was more concerned about the rendering and being able to draw it versus making it look exciting. Like the character by itself is exciting, but right now it's just he's just standing there. You know, if I made this a little bit more dynamic, maybe I could have made him lunging out at you or played with his arms a little bit more. Because I mean, if you look at him, his hands are just kind of limp. They're just like, you know, they're not doing anything. What's he gonna do? Play the piano? I don't know. So this could definitely use work in terms of his gesture. You know, I can make the hands more expressive. Maybe I can make his mouth actually open up. It just kind of looks like he's just, you know, waiting in line at a buffet or something. So this could use some improvement. And if I had to do something like this again, part of me would want to draw it digitally, just because I'd want to color it digitally. I think there's a lot of room in all these open areas to do all sorts of fun stuff with like gradients and texture. And I think doing it digitally would allow me for that. So yeah, I mean, if I had to say how content I am with this drawing, 7 or 8 out of 10. That's my level of content. You know, content with this drawing. I'm happy with it. I was really stoked during the filming of the video that I pulled it off, and I don't want to take away from that because I am really happy with it. But yeah, like with everything I do, I think there's room for improvement, ways I could do things differently. So yeah. So overall, you know, here's the pile of drawings. So yeah, overall, I would definitely do a lot of different things with the drawings here. And you know, right now, just looking at this Vader, this real quick sketch of Vader, I'd love to be able to do something with this. You know, but drawing something of this, I think would take, if I don't want to put enough care into this drawing to make it really stand out, and I'd be looking at something that's longer than a 1 hour long video. And I might do that actually. I might actually do a video where I might break it up into like, I don't know, 2 or 3 parts. Maybe the first part of the video, the first hour is just me penciling it and trying to figure out the gesture. Part 2, maybe it'd be me just inking it out and making it look a bit more finished. And maybe part 3, you know, maybe I'd scan it in and color it digitally. So that's something that I might do in the future. But yeah, so for now, it's just kind of like, this might be something on my plate in the future. You know, redrawing the Vader so it looks like this. Because I'm looking at this sketch right now, and I'm like, wow, this is a cool idea. So, yeah, so that's where we're at. You know, thank you for hanging out with me for an hour. This is going to be the norm. I'll say it now. The exceptions are going to be now if my videos are under an hour. So from here on out, with the exception of my time-lapse drawings and some of my other things, I think most of my videos are going to probably borderline on 45 minutes to an hour. So yeah, thanks for joining me on this interesting and different video. We got to look at my work and be critical of it, which is good. You know, it'll only help you grow as an artist. I mean, that's true with life in general. I mean, yeah, gotta look at the way you act and behave and figure out how you can improve as a human being. And the same applies for art. You know, just anything really. You know, how do you perform? What could you do differently? Where are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? So, just, you're always growing. I'm always growing. You know, just keep in mind that this is always going to be a continuous, never-ending journey. You know, the minute you think you've learned everything is the moment you kind of stop growing or improving as an artist. You know, then you're just going to be plateauing. So it's always good to know that you're going to make mistakes and that some of the stuff you're going to do is going to be flawed. And if you know that, then you know there's room for improvement. And if there's room for improvement, there's always going to be room for growth. So that's something to take away, and that's something I should actually take to heart and apply in my own life also. Because I get complacent sometimes. You know, I might fall in love with a certain drawing style or a certain thing, and I'll be married to that for a while. And then you know, I just hit a plateau and I'm not growing. So challenge yourself, take risks, because I'm gonna learn to try to do that more often. So yeah, this wraps up today's video. I hope you found this informative. And just keep on doing what you're doing. All right, take care. See you next time.